Hey everyone, it's the Nitty Professor, and I thought I would share with you some impressions of the textile and fiber history and culture that I encountered when I was in Sweden. And of course, I had to show off my new cabled beanie that I got finished. I'm really pleased with it. Turned out great. I really like the effect of the cables with this particular yarn because they're subtle, and yet, you know, when you kind of pull back a little bit, you get this cool, there's a zigzag effect from the yarn and the sort of hills and craters from the cables. So yeah, I think it turned out really well, and wanted to show that off a little bit. So I went to basically 3 museums that gave me some insights into the history of the fiber crafts in Sweden and the Nordic countries. Hello, Paris. And, you know, I'm not going to like give a lecture or something. I wanted to give you some impressions and share my enthusiasm for some of the things that I saw because they were really cool. So we're going to start off with Skansen. So Skansen is a museum. It's one of the big 3, I think we could say, at Stockholm. And it's on this island with a big garden and the Vasa Museum and the Nordiska Museum. So, very much worth seeing. And I took pictures of anything that was related to the history of fiber there, and I'll just kind of share them with you. So here we have a pair of spinning wheels, and I saw quite a number of spinning wheels. There's some equipment in this picture that I'm not sure exactly what we're dealing with. I think we've got a yarn swift going on, and there are probably some other things that we're looking at here that I don't know enough really to tell you what's going on there. But aren't those spinning wheels gorgeous? Like, look at that one that's painted in blue. That is just spectacular. Let me see if I can, oh, we got a cat fight going. See if I can kind of, I'm looking at these on my, my drive. Won't let me expand them, but Paris, you can go fight with mistletoe somewhere else. But in any case, that blue one, and look at the way that the wood is turned. That cost a significant amount of effort. Was a craft that was definitely taught. It was a profession, you know. Now, a lot of the wheels that have those turned elements are for flax, and there was a lot of evidence of flax spinning when I was there. I like to say that this is a Swift. I'm trying to get it to show up. I put all of these pictures onto my cloud so I could get them onto my other phone and try to hold them up that way, because I don't know how to integrate them into the video itself. I should probably research that a little bit more. But here's a beautiful spinning wheel, and I believe we are looking at a distaff there on the one side. That one's it's a little more plain. Now, there were people who had it in them to handcraft their own spinning wheels based on need, but a lot of them were made in, you know, a workshop by trained carpenters with more sophisticated tools. But isn't that gorgeous? And just the background, the whole backdrop of that room with the painted walls suggests probably a wealthier farmer, you know, that would have had space like that, especially with the windows. Windows were not commonplace among, should we say, peasants. Now here, this really intrigued me. It is a loom. And one of the things that intrigued me the most, so I have a loom, and I did take some lessons a year ago or so. You all saw some of the results of that. But the heddles on this loom are made of fiber. They're made of thread. They're not like the metal ones that I have on the, I think it's a shocked loom that I have. And I don't know if you can make it any better here. That's actually not the world's best photograph. I apologize. There's a little bit of reflection going on here. But in any case, heddles made of thread I found very intriguing. And it seemed to be the norm with these older looms. Now here's another flax wheel, and I don't know, you might not be able to make it out, but look at that distaff there. It almost looks like tree branches. Isn't that interesting? And for all I know, it was the branch of a tree that was sort of, sanded down so that it could function as a distaff for a flax wheel. Just fascinating. Another beautiful turned sort of a parlor wheel. Look at the distaff on that one. Wow. I mean, that's very ornate. That's not your everyday working wheel. That was probably a very late 19th century sort of arts and crafts movement type of wheel with all the painting and the turned elements on it and that very, very ornate distaff. That's kind of fascinating. Even the pedal, look at the treadle, how it is shaped. It's got a fancy curved shape to it down there. Not your everyday wheel by any means. I don't know if you can make heads or tails of this, but these wheels, they're probably in a little bit less good condition, but they're sort of perched back there in front of that window, also getting a little bit of glare off of my own window. It's a beautiful sunny day. I came home to astonishingly good weather. Here's another one. It's again, it's sort of in the dark. I basically, if it was a spinning wheel or a loom or something related to knitting, I took a picture of it. I don't know if I can do anything about these reflections that I'm getting in here. I am happy for the sunlight, however. And here's another one. Again, it's a little bit dark, but hopefully you can make it out. That one is a little more primitive. Not quite so fancy with all of the turned elements, but functional. And one of the historians there said that these wheels could be used either for flax or wool. So I don't have a whole lot of reason to doubt that that's true. I do understand that an awful lot of wheels back then were specifically geared towards flax, and that if you wanted to spin wool, you would probably have had a wheel with a larger drive wheel on it. So I'm guessing again that this is a flax wheel, and the fact that the distaff has flax on it is surely evidence of that. Look at that. So there's your distaff. Again, it's the one that looks like a tree branch cut off with multiple, tines like a fork. And there is the flax. That was what the spinner would have held her flax on. Now, one of the things that I thought was awesome was at the Nordiska Museum, they participate in conservation breed programs to conserve traditional sheep breeds in Scandinavia. And here's another picture. They had 2 or 3 different breeds of sheep that they were literally cultivating there to promote their thriving. And let me see if I can find, they had some information on the program. I think I uploaded that. Well, we might get to it in a few minutes. But in any case, in a nutshell, the more variety we can have in the world's sheep, the better. Because sheep are actually, they are vehicles of carbon capture. Their wool is a significant proportion of it is carbon. So they're like little carbon sequestration vehicles on legs. And the more that they can exist across the world, not just in certain ideal areas with beautiful meadows, the better it is for the environment and for playing at least some kind of a role in staving off climate change. So I was really pleased to see that this modest museum, well, not that modest, but this museum in Stockholm is participating in those programs. I saw a yarn dyeing demo, and that was just really cool. I got to talk to the woman who was dyeing this yarn. So she had, a fire and a kettle and different materials that she was using to make the dye. And I even asked her about mordants, and we got off onto different things from alum to urine and, whatever was available to people 150 years ago. But she said that given the plants that were available to Swedes in the 19th century to dye yarn, the grand majority of the thread that they made was either yellow or green or some shade thereof. Or it could have been natural colors because of, the original color of the flax or the wool. But you couldn't really do red without investing in materials that you would have had to have gotten from Asia or from other markets. And blue was made with indigo, but black was also a very hard to come by color for thread. Therefore, the costumes, and we'll see this actually, the costumes for special occasions that agrarian Swedes wore featured red. So, for example, if you had red socks, you were basically showing your wealth. It would be like, I guess someone having an Yves Saint Laurent scarf or something, Oh, I can afford that. I got red socks. I got the YSL scarf or whatever. That was their way of showing that they had access to products that were available beyond the confines of their region. So, yellow and green, and I don't know how she got the purple. I should have asked. I should probably go back. There's more yarn to come. Now here's another gorgeous, gorgeous loom. A lot of 19th, 18th century, 19th century Swedish peasants participated in cottage industry where they would weave fabric, linen, most likely, maybe cotton if they, could import the cotton, and they would sell it. So that sort of home industry, hello, mistletoe, was fairly prevalent back in the 18th and 19th centuries. Another beautiful spinning wheel, and again, I assume that is a yarn swift back behind it. And there are actually two spinning wheels there. One of them is kind of dark. These look pretty fancy. Yeah, here's the darker one. I had a kind of a cool moment because I was in this one farmhouse. So a lot of what they have at the Skansen are farmhouses that they've moved from other locations. And they've tried to fill those to the extent possible with authentic artifacts. Everything from furniture to household items, tools, clothing, linens, etc. And in this one house, I saw, the loom and a few spinning wheels. I was like, wow, it would be great to see more of those. And she said, well, you should go to the second floor. I'm like, how do I go to the second floor? And she's like, oh, well, it's closed right now. And I was like, oh, darn. But she's very kind, and she just waited for a little bit of a lull between the people who were wandering into the place where she was doing her demonstrations. And then she took me and a lucky couple that happened to come along at that moment up to the second floor and showed us all kinds of spinning wheels and looms. And I think what you just saw is an example of that. So here's more yarn that they had on display that was dyed there on the premises. And you can see there's red. So I don't know if that's, cochineal or how that was dyed, or maybe that's just some random fiber there. But here's one of the farmhouses. I thought I would show you that. That's one of the farmhouses that you can go into, and they're not all open all the time, but when they are, you can talk to the experts who've really done their research, that maybe they're docents or something, dressed in historical costume, and get a feel based on their knowledge for the home culture back in agrarian Sweden 150, 200 years ago. So now we're moving on to the royal castle, where I did see a few artifacts that align with my interest. So here's a gorgeous tapestry with a leopard, and I'm sure it's Flemish, probably, 17th century, it's a guess, based on the style of the trees. There were a few tapestries visible. I just love this style. It reminds me of going to castles in France and seeing this kind of tapestry left and right. It's just so romantic. Now, this is obviously like it's a cultivated forest. It's not like nature, but so calming and restful and exquisite work. I mean, it must have taken years and a lot of people to create these enormous wall-sized tapestries. That was in the royal castle. And here's something else that is, it's some kind of textile, and I just thought it was cool. So I was like, yeah, I gotta take a picture of that. It's really interesting. The animals look a little bit different from how they look today, at least the ones that we have in our house. Now, at the Nordiska Museum, so they had this whole floor that was dedicated to Nordic life. And they had a lot of artifacts related to spinning and knitting, but also textile and fabric design, which I found quite interesting because in my novels I have this art professor who teaches different classes in fiber art with a colleague or two. And I just want to learn as much as I can, so it was really cool to go to this museum. Here, for example, is an exhibit with sample fabrics and swatches that exemplified the sort of taste, I think around 1800 or so, maybe 1800 to 1850, that era. And it's pretty nice to see that. There were even ones that had wallpaper, but there were a lot of textiles that people could use for drapes or bedding or clothing. And they also had examples of, they were sort of breaking down to an extent the dichotomy between fiber, fabric, textiles that you would find on the global market and those that were produced in the home. And obviously you had to have money to, look out, Paris, to buy something like this, which these are literally stockings made of silk. And I don't know if they would have been made in China. I think there was silk production going on in France a couple hundred years ago, probably still today. So if they got a hold of the silk, the raw silk, then they could produce fabric and garments from that silk. But those were quite an artifact. I have some other silk garments. Here is a gorgeous embroidered waistcoat. It looks to me like it's Enlightenment era, probably mid-18th century. Man's vest. Just exquisite. Here's some slippers. I mean, can you imagine? I don't know. It looks like something that Kay Fassett would needlepoint. Really cool things, It's not the kind of thing you see necessarily in a museum in the United States. This was a coat that was ascribed to a wealthy farmer. The fact that it was long and blue and had all those buttons were recorded as evidence of the farmers having access to unusual levels of wealth. So it could have been a landowner of some kind. And here's an interesting silk dress from a couple of years ago. I mean, it was probably early 19th century, I'm guessing. So they had that on display. Even the sofa shows, fabric and textile from the day, even the wallpaper. And here we have more agrarian, rural, regional type costumes. And you see, so this would have been, as I understand it, something that a couple would have worn for a wedding. That's why we see the red and the black and the level of embroidered detail. You're obviously not going to harvest your wheat field in those costumes. The ability to acquire this level of costume was, again, evidence of your success. And as money became more and more widespread and crops became cash crops over the course of the 19th century, farmers gradually, some of them, if they had the luck, right, they could become landowners. And they could profit from capitalism in the world of you're selling your wheat, selling your grain, your rye, your barley, your flax on the market, whatever it was. So there were different opportunities. They weren't necessarily equally distributed, but to become wealthy, even as a farmer in the 19th century. Of course, it didn't work for everyone, and therefore we had wide-scale emigration from the Nordic countries to the United States in the 19th century, and they referred to that as well in the exhibits. Here's another example of a more rural sort of peasant costume. It intrigues me how the level of color coordination is different from what we might expect today. So I found that intriguing. And note the large spinning wheel in the background there. Based on my understanding, that would definitely have been designated as a wheel for spinning wool. Some of the wheels that existed in the 19th century for wool, you had the idea of the whole production wheel that you could spin very quickly and make a lot of thread in short order. Here is a farmer's shirt. It's just amazing to me that they could preserve a garment like this successfully. That's made of flax. Many, many garments were made of flax because you could grow your own flax, you could comb your own flax, you could spin it, you could weave it, and you could sew it. So a lot of farmers' garments were made with flax like this. So there is yarn spun from flax and thread. And it's just really cool that they have that. There's a little bit of information here. Let me see if I can find it. If I I didn't download it. But basically they were, just enumerating where it was from. It's like, I think 1850 or so. And they showed some of the tools that related to making the yarn. Here is rag balls. And rags could be turned into rugs in particular. I'm not sure what all else they would have been useful for, but rags were very useful when torn in this way because you could, knot them up into, I know specifically of rugs. I think that was very common to use rags for rugs, but heck, they could even be used for bandages. Here's a little miniature loom. Isn't that cute? It's like a baby loom. Just, probably a fancy child's toy. Really interesting that they would have a miniature one. And those two brown containers are actually needle cases. So those would have been needle cases that somebody would have carried around for whatever, to do embroidery or sewing or, sewing in ends on a project. There's also, if you notice back there, there is a shuttle for a loom. So that was also very interesting. Next up, we have carders. So they had some carders on display there. A good, not quite 200 years old. Here's another farmer's outfit made from linen. And I'm intrigued because that blue cloth looks a little bit like denim. But I was reading up on several of those outfits that had that blue cloth. And it was like, nope, that is made from linen. Here's an example of embroidery. So this would have been probably a wedding gift. It might have ended up in a woman's trousseau. I'm not sure on all the details of the history, but you can see the couple on there and all the bright flowers. Definitely a fancy cushion that would have been gifted on the occasion of someone's wedding and then enjoyed as an heirloom from then on. This was built as a quilt, interestingly. Look how ornate. I mean, that's woven. That's an exquisite tapestry. And I want to say that it was not produced locally, but I'm not sure. You can see the trunk. They're displaying, different linens, bedding, quilts, fancy items that are sort of sticking out of that trunk as examples of the kinds of fancy linens that maybe a middle-class farming family would have had. And in front of that, we have the model of someone spinning on a drop spindle, which I thought was really cool. I was seeing recently, it might have been on some historical social media post, about how women would often bring their drop spindles with them, regardless of what they were doing. If they were out and about walking across the fields or even going to shop or whatever, they had an opportunity to spin a little, they would do it because it was survival. They had to spend as much as they could. Here is a linen cabinet. So if you were wealthy enough, you could afford to buy fancy linen lace and you could keep it on display and have it accessible for fancy occasions, christenings, confirmations, that kind of thing. Oh, and I like the fact that they have this model of a dog, indicating that people kept dogs, and They didn't necessarily look like they were made of wood, but they were sort of stand-ins. Here are two sort of home-produced skirts. I'm sure they're probably woven of linen and then sewed, maybe on one of those fancy Singer machines that were being pushed towards the latter half of the 19th century. There was an interesting display of a woman who had apparently had her backpack stolen at a market, and they had all of the contents on display from her backpack, and the suggestion was that she was trying to sell these. So there was a lot of thread, there was embroidery floss, there were needles, there were different implements for use in producing embroidery, and the scissors, all the rest. A really interesting artifact from the 19th century, you know, this girl's stolen backpack. Who knows how it ended up in the museum. And they had other textiles. I'm assuming that these were woven on some of the looms that I showed you earlier. Really interesting. Here's another one. It'd be interesting to know the patterns, you know, that went into those particular weavings. Here is a very fancy vest that maybe it's a bodice. I don't know. You like that, Paris? Paris is rubbing on it. Would not have been the average poor person owning that one. And in addition to weaving here, fancy silk gloves and caps. Sometimes peasants could buy these types of artifacts at the market if they were fortunate. They had a number of just beautiful gloves and caps that would have been purchased and probably, you know, produced in some kind of, you know, professional workshop. And they had a number of exhibits that had to do with the Sami culture. I'm not familiar with that, but I was really intrigued because, again, it does relate to the history of fashion and the relationship between clothing and identity. To have as many Sami artifacts as they did, I thought they did a pretty good job of at least drawing attention to those. They probably could have done more, but you know, they were trying to sort of swipe with a broad brush. Gorgeous silk gown, just incredible. Obviously, that was, you know, something that an extraordinarily rich merchant or maybe someone in royalty would have worn. Here's a tapestry of the Annunciation that is woven. One thing that intrigued me about a lot of the tapestries, the weavings that they had on display, was they reminded me of Hanna Rügen, whom I admire very much, and I'll show you a work of hers in a bit. Here's a pair of mittens with a religious theme. Looks like a church, people going to church, I think. Interesting. It must be the natural hues of the yarn. It's undyed yarn that went into that. And a little bit more fancy pair of mittens that are actually from the Baltics. I'm not sure if these are Latvian or Estonian, but that was another really beautiful sample of knitting. This is an interesting garment because it was billed as a protective underlayer worn by a skier under his headgear that was hand knit, probably according to a pattern. So we're getting here now into more recent history. I don't know, are you familiar with Mary White? They featured a few textile designers at this and also at the next museum I'm going to show you real quick. Mary White designed textiles in around 1960, about the year when I was born. And that is a skirt of hers. You like that, Paris? That's pretty attractive. I thought it was neat how they had, you know, like I was looking into for my my art program in my novel about, well, what kinds of courses would they offer? And one of the things that you can study is how to design and print fabric. So it's interesting to see displays related to that. This hat, I believe, is from the 70s. It's a hand knit hat with a royal nod and made for someone named Ingemar. Fabric designed by Saini Salonen. That sounds Finnish. The fabric Akaru from 1969 was designed by Saini Salonen for Boros Weavery. That must be a weavery in this is 1970, and apparently it was made into curtains. So they had this exhibit showing the area where it was designed, giving information on the history, and then they had the actual fabric itself. So there were a number of examples of fabrics designed by local people. And here's a sweater. I want to say it's from the 70s, sort of exhibiting the style in sweaters that were worn 50 or so years ago. And they even had Astrid Lindgren's blue blouse. The blouse was one of Astrid Lindgren's favorite garments when she worked. She had several similar blouses in the same style, made of cotton woven in plain weave. The seamstress worked with a blockhouse technique, and it was owned by Berit Nielsen, bought in the shop in the old town in Stockholm in the 1970s. So apparently you could buy artisanal woven and sewed products in Stockholm in the 1970s. You can actually buy items that nod in this direction nowadays. I have one out I want to show you. Even though I didn't, the yarn store owner swore up and down to me, by the way, here's the blouse, that there was no yarn spun in, look out, Sweden anymore. They had sent all of their mills to Lithuania. So that is Astrid Lindgren's blouse. However, apparently they still do weaving in Stockholm. And here's one of the examples of that I bought at a little studio in Gamla Stan. And I just think it's adorable. It's my own personal placemat. Right, Paris? Look out, babe. And a poncho dates to the 70s, I want to say. They had an exhibit that sort of showed fashions with 1970s type efforts to do your own styling, your own making. Paris, you're going to have to get off the table. You're being naughty. She's trying to scratch me. A woven blanket featuring red thread. There you go. You're messing up my Laurel Birch placemat. They had, in another exhibit which featured the far north, Arctic life, they had, these are examples of artifacts relating to production, home production of wool, with a comb, a sewing chest, and they had a nice explanation of the importance of wool. This is obviously an indigenous costume. There was emphasis at one point on the individuality that went into Sami clothing and its importance for cultural identity. And those were a few examples of clothing they had for that. So now we are getting to the third museum, where the focus, it was the National Art Museum. And number one, I thought was awesome that, most art museums is painting and sculpture, right? But this one was painting, sculpture, and sort of home decor. So not putting painting and sculpture on a pedestal, but including textiles, ceramics, glass, furniture at the same level. And I thought that was fantastic because I agree with it. So this museum had everything from this sort of incredible tapestry. I think this was around 1600. Sorry, I don't have a whole lot of details, but like I say, I didn't want to turn this into a lecture. I just wanted it to be a sampling. Paris. Yeah, you're being a pill. Okay. And this is probably a Flemish tapestry from 400 years ago. I just adore looking at things like that. Look at this. It's got an elephant. This was portrayed along with a couple of other wall hangings that were coupled with the curtains surrounding a very wealthy royal person's bed. I love looking at that. And then they had, I apologize for getting the name of the artist, but here is a current artist whose paintings they had on display, who also had this carpet that he produced with his landscape paintings. And here's an example of one of the landscape paintings that is on the carpet. Now I assume he designed the carpet and it was made by our workshop. But in any case, it's cool. You know, again, he's a painter who also is interested in textiles. Then they had the same museum, an exhibit related to H&M, which I thought was fascinating. Sustainability in fashion. If H&M, one of the largest fashion companies in the world, could make their production more sustainable, it would really make a difference. I'm just reading off of this explanation. The Innovation Stories project started in 2021 aims for this. Without renouncing design and fashion, they develop new materials and processes. Garments and accessories are made of recycled and recyclable materials. Apparently one of the big issues with the challenge of recycling is that we have all these fabrics that are a mishmash, you know, like the sock yarn that I still have, which has 25% nylon. So it's very difficult to recycle because you can't really separate out the different fibers. Garments and accessories are made of recycled and recyclable materials. The female shoes are executed of artificial leather made of residual products from winemaking. The sequins of the pants are attached with a thread that melts when heated, making it possible to separate and recycle the sequins. To reduce their ecological footprint, the garments could be rented. I've seen that too. So they had this cute little display with a big drama dress and a oversized fur coat that were a part of a, unfortunately the photo didn't make it on here, but a nod to acknowledging the need for and at least some kind of effort on the part of a fast fashion outlet like H&M to at least do something. Going back to tapestry, I forget who made this, but I love it and I'm glad I took a picture of it. And if you want to see it, it is at the National Museum of Art in Stockholm. More fabric. So they also had exhibits on fabric design at the National Art Museum like they did at the Nordiska Museum. Sweden had a flourishing textile industry in the first half of the 20th century, but not until the 1960s did textile companies increasingly begin to make use of Swedish designers, and they name a few of them. Ina Svensson, Gunilla Axén, Birgitta Hahn, and Carl Johan de Geer. So if you know any of these people, they were featured in the museum, and I was privileged to be able to see some of their work. Here is the Hanna Rügen tapestry that I saw, and I was just so happy to find, even if it was just one of her tapestries. A lot of these tapestries are now housed in Brekstad and in Trondheim, and they're not always easy to get at, because when I was in Trondheim last year, the Textile Museum was undergoing renovation. I don't know where things stand with that, but I was able to see a lot of them. In fact, I did a video on that a few months back. The tapestry depicts a guardian spirit carrying a crown and a glass, welcoming the Norwegian painter Ludvig Carlsen into Weave Heaven. So that's the theme of this tapestry by Rügen. She was an anti-fascist protester, and heck, it might be worth it to update my video that I made on her. It's a good moment, right, for anti-fascist protests. Maybe we could learn something from her. So I'll think about that. If you're interested in having me do another video about Hanna Rügen, let me know, because I would consider it. Here is a curtain called the Rosorna, Hanging the Roses from 1930 by Märta Moos Fjätterström. And it has a stylized rose garden. Again, textile design. Really cool stuff. Very inspiring. We're getting towards the end here. Here's some more fabric. Of course, I had to take pictures of dolphins and animals. You know, that's like my thing. Especially if it has even a remote relation to Paris and her ilk. And here's another tapestry with really cool lions and birds. Lion apparently is a symbol of royalty in Sweden, and they were everywhere. They were everywhere. Then I have a tapestry from 1897, arts and crafts movement, I guess, by Alf Wallander, a fine artist who, like many artists and sculptors, had a more successful career in the art industry. He designed glass, ceramics, and textiles. and did this tapestry called Magpies in an Apple Tree. It's kind of small, but hopefully you can make heads or tails of that. It was really pretty to look at. I could see turning that into a needlepoint. That would be fun. And what else have we got? A butterfly. This is a mixed media piece. You can see that it looks like a cicada landed on that tapestry, and it's just part of the art. Very bold and modern, beautiful design. Here's another example of a very ancient tapestry that I thought was really cool. Woven, again, I can't remember who made it, but I'm getting here into some of my pictures got out of order, but here are the skeins of yarn that were made of flax, and it shows you that they are made in southern Sweden and they date to around 1900. Let's see what else is showing up here at the tail end. A painting, and I don't know if you can make it out, but a woman is spinning in the corner of the painting, and I do like household paintings that sort of romanticize. I suppose we do that, right? We kind of romanticize household crafts today and turn them into hobbies, whereas back then for a lot of people they were brutal necessities. This is a kind of a flax comb from one of the exhibits in the Nordiska Museum. I don't know how these got out of order, but why not? They're still really cool. Information on the one quilt that I showed that gives you a little detail from there. And again, it was from southern Sweden around 1780. Made of wool and linen, woven by the sisters Elna and Karna Persdotter for Karna's wedding to the farmer Niels Mattsson. And it has monograms on it. Tells about their history. They were daughters of an innkeeper, where they lived. It would have taken 1,000 hours to weave. Its manufacture required a great deal of time and resources, and particularly knowledge. The quilts owned by the innkeeper's 6 daughters all had specific patterns, and they were dispersed in later generations and sold to auctions, private collectors, or museums. More textiles. 19th century, Swedish provenance, I believe. Let's see what else we got here. The information on the textile of the Annunciation has to do with Waffle Day, and I will say there were a lot of places that sold waffles in Stockholm. I didn't buy any because I don't eat a lot of carbs. I had the bread in the morning, that was enough. But in Scania, they have this feast of the Annunciation, which is known as Waffle Day. And the Virgin Mary remained popular even after the Reformation. The weaving is done with a Flemish technique. They were used for covers, cushions, and seats. That is what we get from that image. Here is an example that they had on display of an Icelandic sweater in the exhibit about life around the Arctic Circle. The rise of the Icelandic sweater. They were traded like money, apparently. Icelanders used knitted sweaters as a means of payment early on, something that can be traced back to the 1500s. But it wasn't until the 1920s that knitwear became fashion. Eventually, Chanel and Patou got interested. The Icelandic sweater became popular in early 40s. Tourists began snagging them up, and I actually have one that dates back to around 1970 that my godmother bought me. Here's some wool garments from early Faroese, like early 20th century Faroe Islands. Lots of wool to keep them warm. There was some information on clothes and an angry sea. And I thought this information right here, I'll just quickly scan through this. Clothes and identity, and this was specifically regarding the Arctic Circle, but I think it applies everywhere. In the Arctic as elsewhere, clothes are an expression of personal identity. They are an opportunity to communicate and feel beautiful, but they're also tools for playful action, a way of saying something, which is so cool. When, I look at some of the things that people buy and it's got like pink written across the front of it, or Gucci or whatever. And it's like, you're saying what the company wants you to say. You're not saying what you want to say. And when you make your own things, you're saying your own message. You're being yourself. You're not branded. And the very idea of like branding, you know, with the hot iron going on your skin, that's kind of where we're at with the clothing culture today. People have really succumbed to the hype that marketers produce around their clothing. In Inuit and Sami culture, clothes often tell a story of identity, culture, history, and belief. Production of traditional garments remains a vital activity in the Arctic, encouraged despite the availability of mass-produced clothing from China. I think Iceland is a good example of that, because the Icelandic sweater is very prevalent all around Iceland, based on everything I've been able to see. Being able to sew and create garments oneself is empowering and a source of self-respect. Here's an example that they presented of that in that exhibit from the Sami culture. Oh, and here we go. Finally found the H&M pictures. The dress here apparently is made of 100% polyester, which makes it recyclable, reclaimable. Whereas if you mix it with Ramie or something like that, then you can't. So they're at least doing something. And I have reached the end of my photos. So I hope that was at least somewhat entertaining for you to get a sketch of what I encountered with my exploration of fiber production, textile history in Stockholm. I could have learned more, depending on what I might have done. Would have been interesting to go to fiber fairs, or go to the Skansen on a different day when they had different demonstrators. But I'm keenly interested in fiber history. Here's a book that I have, Spinning Wheels, Spinners and Spinning. And I studied a lot of images and information like this to write book 4 of my series, called The Spinning Wheel Maker, because I have two eras. I have, on the one hand, a ghost who builds spinning wheels in the arts and crafts era, and a modern youth who, as an extension of his effort to assert his agency, learns how to make spinning wheels. So it's fascinating. I could go on. And a little bit of update. If you've made it this far, congratulations on my novel. I am at the point now where I'm figuring out how to get everything uploaded properly, and hopefully within a week or two, you will be able to read book 1 of Romance at the Fiber Eagle. So I'm going to call it quits here. It's the longest video I've ever made. If you've made it this far, thank you. Really appreciate it. Y'all have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.